We're back with another episode of App Stories. This episode is brought to you by Concepts, Revenue Cat, and SourceGraph. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Doing all right. A busy week that we had putting out last week, putting out our OS previews. And, we did the episode last week about all the system features that are coming to iOS, iPadOS, and macOS. But we didn't get around to talking about the system apps. And there's so much overlap between all of the different OSs there. I thought we ought to do an episode, and I don't know, maybe two, about that and talk about some of the changes coming to the apps, because what's really changed, I think, over the years, especially the last 2 years, is that these apps are now moving in tandem. And that's like maybe something people may not notice right away. But, it wasn't that long ago when like maps on the Mac would lag way behind what was happening on the iPhone. And, there are a lot of examples of that. But now things are moving kind of in lockstep.
Yeah, it's definitely like a welcome change from a few years ago, when we used to have this problem of like everything exciting is happening on iOS and iPadOS, and the Mac is sort of there just waiting and, lagging behind. Or maybe like the opposite was true with Apple doing pro features on the Mac, but then the iPad not getting any of them. And this is something that you actually touched upon in your preview story from last week, how we are in a very different place now compared to a few years ago, where the Mac is no longer just this island. I think that's how you described it in one of your reviews from a few years ago. But now you can really see the work that Apple has been doing in terms of unifying the platforms and the app ecosystem. And I think it's a fascinating topic, because you actually talked about this often in your reviews, John. Like, yes, it's about unifying the ecosystem, but it's also been about giving developers more, not just one way to develop apps for the Mac. So it's this fascinating dichotomy between, yes, we're about unifying the ecosystem between iPhone, iPad, and the Mac, but also as a Mac developer, you have multiple options, whether it's SwiftUI or Catalyst or, AppKit, but, with different APIs. Like, that's a fascinating strategy from Apple. I don't know how long it's going to last, but it seems to have worked pretty okay so far, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, from Apple's standpoint, I think it has enabled the company to keep these apps up to date on the same schedule for the last couple of years. And, maybe 2 years isn't a huge trend, but it is more than we've seen in the past. And I think, though, but the whole other angle to this is how the various OSs are becoming unified for users, just easier to move from one to the other, both in terms of familiarity, but also in terms of using features across multiple devices and moving from one to the other without, any hiccups there. And the developer angle, which is making it easier for developers to create an app that can then be released on every platform at the same time, increasing the size of the market that's available. And that, I think, is particularly good when it comes to the Mac and the iPad, because if an iPhone app can be without, it's easy to say it's not a lot of work, but it is work. But if it's easier to bring an iPhone app to those other platforms, those platforms will benefit from the size of the iPhone market.
Yeah, and something you said, I think, is also a good point. Like the ecosystem feels unified for users. Maybe it's not necessarily unified for Apple behind the scenes, but as users, what we see is what we get, essentially. And so one of the examples that we'll cover later in this episode, or maybe in the next episode, we'll see how much we want to talk about these system apps. But Shortcuts, I think, is a really good example, where SwiftUI gave Apple an opportunity to, without growing pains last year, to bring Shortcuts to the Mac. And that rollout maybe could have been handled a bit better. But now that the majority of the work has been done, now Shortcuts on the iPad, iPhone, and Mac are have mostly achieved feature parity. with the exception of personal automations.
Right.
That's still the missing feature. But as you wrote on MacStories, now even share sheet support is coming to shortcuts on the Mac. So that's definitely an example of Apple taking something that was existing on the iPhone and iPad, using SwiftUI. The rollout wasn't as smooth as maybe Apple hoped, but it worked. And now we have the same actions and mostly the same features across both platforms.
Right. And there's no doubt there have been growing pains. I mean, we saw that all the way back to 2018 when we got the sneak peek and we got some of those early Mac Catalyst apps from Apple that weren't great, and some of them still aren't that great. It's possible with Mac Catalyst to make both a good-looking app and a not-so-good-looking app. I mean, I think that's true with every framework that Apple has. It's really, it's up to the developer to make it fit well with the particular platform, and I think we are in a place today where that's more possible than ever. Although there are, of course, rough edges with some of the SwiftUI implementations and stuff like that, it continues to improve, and I think we're in a pretty good place. I mean, overall, there's always work to be done, but I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's a net positive.
Yeah. So let's start, I guess, by talking about the latest cross-platform apps that are available on the Mac and iPad this year. Obviously, the first that comes to mind is weather. We finally have a weather app on the iPad, and I believe it's also available on Ventura.
It is, and it's interesting looking at them because that was the one that's new to both platforms.
Yeah.
And it takes what we have on the iPhone, which is a long scrolling list of different tiles that have different kinds of weather forecast data on them, and spreads it out into kind of a dashboard with different tiles fitting together. And the two apps between the Mac and the iPad are virtually identical. I think the only big difference with the Mac is that the left sidebar has a very plain text look to it for your locations that you've saved.
It's a bit more fun on the iPad.
Yeah, on the iPad, it's tiles basically, and there's a little more, there's some graphics behind the tiles and behind the information. Whereas on the Mac, it's very plain. But it's if you've used weather on iOS, it's very much the same thing. It's got, I think it can be odd on the Mac to add a new location because there's a search box. There's no plus button to add a location. You have to first search, and once you search, a plus button appears, and you can add it to your saves that way. But beyond that, I mean, it works basically the same way. And you tap on any of those tiles, many of them will give you additional detail about the forecast and the statistics they're showing.
Yeah, it's obviously I'm also happy that it's finally available on the iPad. Your locations sync with iCloud. So when I set up the iPad version of all of the locations that I had on my iPhone, they synced back to the iPad as well. Something that I've noticed and that I want to mention here is that Apple, with this weather app this year, it's not just about the rollout on 2 more platforms. It's also about the long-anticipated launch of the Apple Weather Kit service.
True.
The app, well, I guess it's called the Apple Weather Service, and Weather Kit is the framework for third-party developers if they want to use that data at a price in their apps. Apple Weather, of course, builds on top of the Dark Sky acquisition from a couple of years ago. And if you're a third-party developer and you want to use the Weather Kit framework, there's different tiers of usage that you can check out on the Apple developer website. Now, what I've noticed in this first month is that the old weather app tends to be more accurate for me. So I noticed this a couple of weeks ago when there was a thunderstorm here in Rome, and the weather app on iOS 16, so the new one, using the Apple Weather Service, had no idea that a thunderstorm was happening as it was happening in front of me. Out of curiosity, I checked Sylvia's iPhone, which is still running 15. So it's running the Weather Channel data, I suppose. And it was accurate. It was saying, yeah, there's a thunderstorm now, and you can expect, light showers after that. So and then I went looking on Twitter and on our Discord server, and I noticed a bunch of other people saying, yeah, I've also noticed that like right now, if you do a side-by-side comparison between iOS 15 and 16 with the Apple Weather app, the old one seems to be more accurate. So I suppose that Apple may still be fine-tuning the data reported by the service. I want to keep an eye on this because obviously, for me personally, at the moment, Carrot Weather with the AccuWeather service continues to be the most accurate weather app in terms of forecast and conditions right now at the moment that I've used so far.
Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised only because I think historically Dark Sky, which Apple acquired, was very much more a US-centric forecast
that's
service.
my concern. Yeah.
And they're expanding that to cover other countries, but that could explain some of the difference. And I do feel like Apple should, it's interesting. I mean, they've got their own service now, so they want to use it in their app. But if their app doesn't cover other countries well, you would think that they would still use AccuWeather or Weather Channel or whatever other service that they were paying for before. But maybe they're planning to switch everything over. I don't know. We'll have to see, I guess.
Clock is also available on Ventura.
It is Clock. We've got a clock. We had Clock already on the iPad, but on Ventura, we've got a clock. You can do, it's nice in the sense that, it's integrated with Siri and with shortcuts. So you can do things like start timers and set alarms with Siri if you want to do that. To me, that gives me a lot. I mean, that's one of the things I do a lot with Siri is set timers and alarms. And having those two things available on the Mac makes it a lot more likely that I'm going to use Siri on my Mac, even though I will admit I don't use Siri on my Mac a whole lot. And it can get confused if my iPhone's sitting here or next to my Mac and that kind of thing. But if you've used Clock on the iPad, you'll know what to do on the Mac because it's basically identical. It only can do single timers, which I think only the HomePod can do multiple timers still at this point, which is a little too bad and odd. But yeah, Clock is available on Ventura.
Yeah, that's I'm really happy for you.
I really don't have much more to say about it than that, Federico.
Yeah, I know.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Concepts, the infinite canvas app for iPad. Sketch, explore, and share endless ideas with Concepts' infinite canvas app for iPad. Designed for creators of all types, the app is ideal for visual thinking, note-taking, drawing, and professional design. Concepts lets you interact with and edit your sketches, helping you think and draw smarter. Because everything you draw in the app is a vector, you can move, edit, and organize your sketches after you draw them using natural gestures. Sketch freely with liquid pens, markers, and brushes in designer Copic colors. Create mood boards with images, PDFs, and objects, then draw right on top. Design with tools like grids, snap, and real-world measurements to create professional projects. Connect your device to any display for instant whiteboarding with a built-in presentation mode. Concepts is used by designers and illustrators at companies like Apple, Disney, PlayStation, Unity, and other companies globally to sketch, design, and communicate visually. Concepts comes free as a basic sketching app with the ability to unlock features via a subscription or one-time purchase. MacStories readers and App Stories listeners can enjoy a special 3-month extended free trial for Concepts when they sign up for an annual subscription. To get that deal today, go to concepts.app/MacStories. Again, that special deal just for listeners of this show and readers of the site is concepts.app/MacStories. Our thanks to Concepts for their support of the show and for their support of the entire Summer OS preview series.
Okay, let's talk about, let me choose. Safari. Let's talk about Safari in terms of system changes that are coming to every platform, right? That's the thing that we're going to discuss here. All these features are, I think, mostly available everywhere. So I guess the first change in the new Safari that I want to mention is the ability to share a tab group with other people.
Yeah, this is the big one.
We've been testing this. Well, you've been testing this with me, and it kind of ruined Safari for you. So what was the bug there?
Okay, so I had a tab group called Ventura, and I was collecting some links that I was reading through while I was preparing my preview story. And at some point, I was working on this section of the preview, and I wanted to do a little more hands-on testing with the sharing because I'd used some of the other new features that we'll get to on tab groups, but I hadn't tried sharing yet. So I shared it with you. You dropped in and looked around, I guess. But every other time, it looked, at least as far as I could tell, every time you were on your Mac and had Safari open, I would see that you were active because the collaborate button in the toolbar would switch to your user avatar. And if you were actually in Safari and in that tab group, it would show that which tab you were in. But what would happen is it's a little hard to explain. At the time I had the most problems, all I had were 2 tabs in the group. One was like the Ventura preview page on the Apple website, and the other one was the detailed feature list that Apple has. Because I was just kind of using that as a checklist to make sure I hadn't missed anything I wanted to cover in my preview. And when you were in there, those tabs would just flicker into existence and out of existence, switching between a blank start page with just, the background of like my favorites and the other things that are on the start page now, and the actual tabs that I wanted to have open. So if I wanted to go read one of those pages, I could start reading it, but then it might suddenly disappear and I would have a start page again and I couldn't read it. So it was flickering on and off. So eventually I went in and I turned you off and unshared the tab group with you because it wasn't working. Did you have anything like that? Because I never really asked you, I don't think.
No, I didn't have anything like that, but I was also just testing on the iPad, so I'm not sure if things are different there. But no, it's nice. I could see the tab group in the sidebar. It had a little collaboration icon. I think this is going to be nice.
Oh, I think it's going to be great once it's not buggy. Yeah, I think, for instance, as I mentioned in my preview, we could use it for sharing links when we're going to do a podcast, or we could, or you could do it if you're planning a vacation with other family members, something like that. Collecting links, collecting places you want to go, things you want to do. I think it's a really nice feature. It was a little rough at the beginning for me.
Yeah. One of the other features of tab groups in the new Safari is the ability to expand the tab groups in the sidebar. This is very handy because now you can see the tabs contained within a group right there from the Safari sidebar. Now, obviously, if you have a ton of groups or if you have a ton of tabs within the group, the sidebar is going to get really tall and you're going to have to scroll. But it's nice to be able to see those tabs and long press them or like show a context menu for those tabs without having to open the group and then click the tab in the, below the address bar. I think it's a nice addition to managing tabs inside tab groups. There's some syncing related additions to Safari. The big one, I think, is the ability to sync your extensions. So your native Safari extensions, which came to the iPhone and iPad for the first time last year and have been available on the Mac for 2 years, I think. Now those will sync across devices. And I think it's very nice the way that Apple has handled this. So if you don't have a Safari extension installed, once you go into settings, Safari extensions, iOS and iPadOS 16 will tell you have these other extensions enabled on Safari on another device. Do you want to enable them here as well? And if you do that, you can basically initiate the download for the app that offers the extension right there from the extensions settings page in the settings app. So it's all very unified in terms of how you can enable an extension and get prompted to download the host app right there from settings. And obviously, if the developer is using universal purchases, you don't have to pay anything else. And it's the same app with extensions on 3 different platforms. And obviously, this also means you can fine-tune your extensions on one device, and later you can find changes reflected on your other device. Like I can change my extensions on the iPad, and I'll see the same changes propagate to the iPhone later, which is a cool change because it means I'm not doing the same work 3 times.
Right.
For Safari on the Mac, iPhone, and iPad.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I wish I had had this last fall when we were exploring all the new iOS and iPadOS extensions, because we installed a lot of different ones and it would have been handy to have those propagated across all the devices. But yeah, I'm going to be definitely looking forward to using this too as I discover new extensions. You know, the other thing that's syncing between versions of Safari now are different, like website specific things, like whether you've got something set up to always load in reader mode, which is something you can do and I use quite a bit with certain sites. Also, like zoom level, I think, as well, is another one, which you can zoom in the text to make it bigger or smaller or whatever you want to do. Those kind of things can sync across all versions of Safari now too.
Yeah, which is very nice. And there's some other API-related additions for developers. I'm curious to see what these will mean in practice.
Yeah, me too.
But for example, there's unlimited storage for extensions now. They used to be limited to 10 megabytes. I think there was a 10 megabyte quota for extension storage. That's been lifted. There are new APIs for declaring content blocking rules and scripting rules. So I'm curious to see what this means for content blockers, specifically, like the combination of these new APIs and lifting the limitations of 10 megabytes for storage could mean much more powerful content blockers and much more powerful extensions in general. So I want to see if even better extensions come out this year for Safari. You know, some developers bringing them over from Google Chrome or Firefox, for example.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, and for Safari, this is somewhat shortcuts related, but there's, as we mentioned before, there's new actions to open tab groups and to open specific views of Safari from shortcuts, such as our dear old friend reading list. You can now open reading list directly from shortcuts, but there are no other reading list changes, unfortunately.
No, and having shortcuts in the share sheet is a big deal for Safari, because it does let you do things like grab the URL, grab the content of the page, that sort of thing. The one thing that doesn't work that I tried is it doesn't accept text selections. Basically, the shortcut inputs that come from the share sheet on the Mac are the URL, the page content, and a PDF. So that lets you make PDFs that look really nice too. You know, we've talked about in the past about how on iOS and iPadOS in particular, you can create really nice PDFs using the, either print to PDF essentially when you use the print command on those OSs, or shortcuts. And this is now possible on the Mac. And I did try it with some longer articles, and it seemed to work well and not get cut off like we've had issues with in the past. Although I haven't really tested it extensively yet.
No.
This episode of App Stories is sponsored by RevenueCat. If you're a developer, your time should be spent on what makes your app special, not hassling with StoreKit. In-app subscriptions are critical to a lot of apps' success, but getting them right is tough. That is, unless you're using RevenueCat. RevenueCat is payment infrastructure simplified. You don't have to worry about managing servers or writing complex back-end code. They take care of all of that for you. What's more, RevenueCat is cross-platform, so when you decide to expand beyond iOS to Android or the web, you can do that with them too. RevenueCat lets you sync status across all of your customers' devices, and it has terrific out-of-the-box analytics to track your revenue, customer retention, and churn, so you're always on top of how your business is performing. RevenueCat integrates in-app purchase data with best-in-class tools too, and it's trusted by over 9,000 apps, including ones like Notion, StockTwits, and the photography app VSCO. Set up RevenueCat today. Integrating with your app will take just hours, not days. So what are you waiting for? Visit RevenueCat.com and learn more today. There's a link in the show notes too that'll let them know that you came from App Stories. Again, that URL is RevenueCat.com. Our thanks to RevenueCat for their support of the show.
All right, what do you want to talk about next?
Let's talk about Mail, because this is probably the one that I'm even more excited about than Safari, because I feel like I've been on this journey with Mail where I finally, in I guess it was at the beginning of 2021 when I decided, you know what, I'm just going to break my golden rule, which is don't have different apps on different OSs when it's some kind of critical everyday use type of app. And I split my usage of mail apps between MimeStream on the Mac, which is a beta, but a very solid beta, native Gmail email client with fantastic search and other modern features. And then Spark on the iPhone and the iPad, in part because of its collaboration tools that we use for some of our MacStories work. So I split those two apart. And now with the features that are coming in Mail this year, I think I am going to finally return to Mail. I will I almost certainly will keep Spark installed for the collaboration tools that we use. But the app that I use on all those platforms is probably going to be Mail because it has just exactly the modern features that I want. It doesn't have all the ones you've ever heard of from all of the experimental email apps out there, but I think it has the ones that are most important to most people. At least they're the ones that I'm excited about.
Yeah, I gotta tell you, I'm really happy that I switched back to Mail a few months ago.
Yeah.
This is something that I do all the time because sooner or later, the native feel of Mail always comes back calling me.
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
Come back. And every single time I fall for it. But this time, I'm happy I did because I can't believe that the Mail is actually kind of good now, right? Like the search improvements. I was really skeptical when I saw at WWDC that Apple said, oh, we're going to make search so much faster than before, and we're going to give you suggestions, and we're going to account for synonyms or typos as you type your search query. And I was like, yeah, sure, you're going to do that. I don't believe you. But that actually works. Search results, even from years ago, come up in seconds as I'm searching in Mail. They get highlighted in yellow, which is a small thing, but like being able to see where the match for my search query is in the Mail message is actually a huge deal for me.
Oh,
and
yeah,
I like
definitely.
that a lot. And I tried searching things that I knew were in my Mail archive by intentionally having typos in the search query.
Mm-hmm.
And it does work. I haven't tested the synonyms yet, but the fact that you can type something and it's not quite right, but Mail will still find it, that actually works. And
right.
I'm really surprised.
Right. And it does a nice job of organizing the search results with, the drop down that kind of divides things up between, contacts and message content and attachments and all those kind of things. There is one caveat on search with the Mac right now. And, we're still early in the beta season, but I find the search to be very fast unless I'm in all mailboxes. If I'm searching all of my mailboxes at one time, it won't return results. It's only when I'm in individual mailboxes that it's currently working, which is something I need to file some feedback about because I discovered that working on the preview. But other times it's great. And even if you just click in the search box, it's going to give you suggestions based on things that you recently retrieved using search. So if you, forgot something and need to go back and find it again quickly, you get, things like recent attachments and other things that you can get back to pretty easily.
Something else that is also coming to Mail this year is the ability to have reminders for your email messages. This is basically snoozing, right? For
Right.
Mail, where you can be reminded of a message at a future date and time, and as you do, the message will be temporarily hidden from your inbox, and it'll be surfaced again at the time you specify. I'm really happy about this feature. This is something that I'm already using a lot for messages that I know I will have to do something about those, but not right now. I don't want to archive them. I don't want to create a reminder in the reminders app for them, even though I could. And those reminders would have a deep link to that individual message. But I just prefer having this option right now where I can just swipe, say, remind me, pick a date and time, and the message will disappear and I'll get a notification again in the future.
Yeah.
The one thing I don't like is that because I'm a SaneBox user, the thing I've noticed is that you cannot create reminders for messages in a mailbox like saying later or saying news, which are, yeah, that's unfortunate. And I wish like the swipe gesture just doesn't appear for me inside those mailboxes.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I've stopped using Sanebox.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I did. And part of that was because with MimeStream, it was using, it has the Gmail ability to move things into different categories, things like forums and notifications and then your main inbox. So it does something similar automatically already. And that's probably the thing I miss most about MindStream since I've been using Apple Mail is that everything's going in my inbox, which isn't ideal. But I do like this feature a lot. What's interesting, I kind of was peeking at how it works. And what it looks like it's doing is that it's doing is really setting a future date on the email itself, so that then when that date arrives, it bounces back into your inbox at the top because it's now the current email instead of an old email. So it's still there. Even if you archive it, it'll still be there in your all mail. It just has a different date on it at the time. A similar feature, Federico, is follow-up, which in my testing, it looks like it automatically, if you have words in your message that say something like, could you get me X? Yeah. Or can we meet at this time? Questions where you're asking for some sort of response from somebody that it'll come back to you 3 days later at the top of your mailbox automatically if you haven't gotten a response, which I like a lot because that happens a lot to me with things where I need, I send something, I think, maybe a week later, I think, oh, did I ever hear from that person? And maybe I hadn't, but now I don't have to worry about that as much or set myself reminders because it'll just show back in my inbox.
So 3 days, huh?
3 days is how it works. Yeah. And that's not changeable. I wish, I think that's probably a good rule of thumb, but with a lot of Apple things, there aren't a lot of settings around these features. They're just what Apple thinks they should be.
Right. And I believe Mail also alerts you if you're composing a message and you're missing like an attachment or a recipient. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. With recipients, you have to, however, there's like a new notation that's similar to what you use in Notes where you have to @reply someone in the body or plus reply. You put a plus or an @ symbol before their name in the email, and then it'll know that that's intended to be a message to a particular person, and will give you an alert. The attachments thing is just looking more for search terms like see attached or something like that.
Yeah, and I can tell you that unfortunately, having set my iPhone to English, to the English language, but composing an email in Italian, because I'm a speak two languages.
Sure.
And I totally did it. Like I said, attached in Italian, you will find this PDF document. And I sent the message and I forgot to attach it. And Mail didn't tell me anything. Because I guess because the message was in Italian, it didn't alert me that I was actually missing the attachment. Thankfully, 2 minutes later, I was like, wait, did I attach the document? And I had to go in and send the second message and say, sorry, but I actually forgot to include the attachment. Here you go.
Yeah. I think there are a bunch of features this year that are English only, I think, and some that are limited to a very narrow set of countries.
Yeah. If I was quicker in realizing that I did not actually attach the file, I could have used another Mail feature, which is undo send. This is another thing that Apple is doing. I believe it's a 10 or 15 second timer.
I think it's 10. It's pretty quick.
10. Yeah, it's pretty quick. You have 10 seconds. Basically, when you hit send, in the message, instead of being send right away, it'll be like in a holding spot for 10 seconds, and you will get this undo send text label at the bottom of the Mail UI. At least on the iPhone, it's at the bottom. Yeah. And you can hit undo, and that message will not be sent. It'll be back in draft mode, and you can actually make the edits you want to make, or in my case, include the attachment you forgot to include. and you can send the message again. So you have 10 seconds to undo sending a message. This works like Twitter, for example. If you have Twitter Blue, I believe it's one of the paid features, you have an undo feature for sending your tweets, which behaves slightly differently on Twitter. On Twitter, it works that you can post a message, you hit send, and then you have a loading bar, and you can choose to go back and edit, or you can say send now. Apple's implementation is a bit different. The message actually goes away, but you have an undo button, and if you press it, then the message comes back. But it's basically the same feature.
Right.
When you're hitting send, you're not actually hitting send. You gotta wait for 10 seconds for the message to go out to a server and actually go out to the recipient. So it's nice to have.
Yeah, on the Mac, it's on the left sidebar. So it's, very similar implementation there. We shouldn't forget to mention scheduled send too, which is something
this is something you're excited about.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't use it a ton, but I don't know. I have these times where I go through and do a bunch of email messages at one time. And a lot of times maybe it's late in my day and I communicate with people all over the world, especially in Europe. And sometimes I don't want to bother somebody and have their, ping their email late at night. Or maybe I'm doing it on a Saturday morning and they're not important emails that have to go out immediately. They can go out on Monday morning. And I don't want to get mired in an email conversation over the weekend for some reason. So I will use schedule send, and you can schedule them to, go out in an hour or later in the day, or just remind me, you can pick a particular date and time too. So I've used it a couple of times already. The downside of this feature on the Mac is that your Mac has to be running. If your Mac's not running, and I tried this, it will just sit there. Even when you turn your Mac back on, if the time has passed, it'll just sit there in the outbox waiting for you because I sent you a message that may actually still be in my email. I don't even know from when we were doing our testing that it was. Here's my send later folder, and there are 2 messages here for Federico.
Interesting. So it doesn't use, what's the name of the feature? Power Nap? Does macOS still have Power Nap? Where some features...
It does. And I think that it might sometime. I'm not sure. That's one thing that I need to look at more carefully. I actually shut down the Mac and so if it's truly shut down, it won't go. I have not tried it with a laptop to see if it works in AppNap.
Got it. And finally, there's this other feature, Rich Links, which is something that I'm at the moment, and I filed feedback for this, John. I'm so surprised that it's only in Mail and not in the other place where it makes the most sense, which is Apple Notes. But whatever, you can convert plain text URLs in an email message from the HTTPS URL into a rich link. Now, those rich links, they are styled exactly like the rich links in Messages and in Notes. And it's nice because when you press when you paste the URL, you'll get a little triangle icon. And if you tap that icon, you can say format as rich link. And then if you have the rich link, you can say go back to I don't remember the name, go back to URL. That's super nice because it means you can send a message that visually looks nicer and has a preview of the rich link, or you can be really hardcore about it and have the plain text URL. Now, I really like this feature, but I don't understand why it's only in Mail. The app where this option makes the most sense to have is Notes. But Notes is still limited to only support rich links when you save a link via the share sheet and the Notes extension. Now, I filed feedback for this. Ideally, you should be able to have this option available everywhere. In all these apps that support rich links, you should be able to paste a URL, and either it gets converted by default to a rich link, and then later you can choose to revert to the plain text form, or you should get the same menu that you get in Mail, which is format to rich link. That should also be available in Notes. Right now, it's available in Mail, and I was curious about how this would work, so I actually tested it with Gmail. I was concerned that those rich links would appear as rich links only on Apple platforms. Mm-hmm. But I believe what Apple is doing instead is they are formatting the rich links with HTML and CSS inside the email message. So if you send a rich link from your iPhone or iPad or macOS running Ventura to someone else, and you open that message, say on gmail.com in a web browser or on a Windows machine, you will still see the rich link because that's styled using native HTML and CSS in the body of the email message.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. I suppose if somebody's got their email set to plain text, they'll get a bunch of HTML in their email, but oh well.
Yeah, whatever. Who cares about those people?
All right. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but you have to get them onboarded. And if your company is growing, onboarding new developers will be a common occurrence and a big undertaking every single time. One of the biggest challenges for new hires is to get up to speed with the projects that their new teams are working on. This can be tricky if code bases are large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization helps, but given the fact that most companies store their knowledge in at least a couple of different places, how do you make sure that the knowledge is accessible by those who need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their own learning over time and in different situations. Teams that don't use SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues questions and reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. But with SourceGraph, every developer can search through millions of repositories to find specific code, saving them and their colleagues time. That way, when questions do come up, you know that they're the big stuff that's worthy of the time. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier, and today they're working with leading companies across every industry, including 3 out of the 5 top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. Visit about.sourcegraph.com to learn more. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see how it can help yours. Or just click the link in the show notes to let them know that you came from the show. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of App Stories. Federico, let's talk about messages because we're heavy users of messages, and it got some nice features. I mean, it's no WhatsApp, I don't think, but there are some long overdue features here, and one is yet again another undo send feature where you can actually recall your messages. Now, this is only going to actually recall your message if, in fact, all the people you're sending it to are also on the latest betas at this point, because I'm not sure what it does with, I think it just says so-and-so withdrew or recalled this message if they are on iOS 15, for instance.
Yeah, undo. This is very nice to have in messages. I'm still getting used to it because like years of muscle memory have me used to being able to delete a message or retract a message on WhatsApp, but not on iMessage. I'm still getting used to this. But it's nice, and obviously, like it's not working quite right now if you have friends not on the public beta of iOS 16. Those messages obviously will not be deleted on their end. But yeah, I'm a fan of this. I think it's about time. And same with editing a message, right? It's the same idea. You can undo sending a message, or you can edit a message within a 15-minute window, which is the kind of functionality that has existed on other competing messages platforms for years. And now iMessage is catching up on this front. So cool to have. And similarly, I believe you can now recover your deleted messages, your deleted conversations for up to 30 days. This is the same recover functionality that you may have seen in Notes or Files or other apps that supported recovering deleted files before.
Yeah, they've also got collaboration features coming to messages too, which isn't available on the Mac yet. I don't know if I've seen it on iOS either. Have you?
No, I have not seen that at all. I have not even seen the SharePlay integration, actually, or I'm not sure how it's supposed to work.
All right. Well, I guess a TBD on that one. Why don't we talk about photos next, Federico? Because here we've got the iCloud shared photo library, which is an interesting It's an interesting feature that I'm going to be very interested to see what people think of it, because it is not a generalized group sharing feature that I think maybe some people think it could be used as. It's very much designed to work with your immediate family.
Yeah. So the idea is that you can only be in one shared library at a time. You actually talked about this in your macOS Ventura overview. If you set up a shared library with, say, your partner, but then later your brother invites you to another shared library, you cannot do that. You can only be in one shared library at a time. What I like about this, though, is a couple of things that Apple is doing. The fact that you can choose to share your entire library or share your library from one specific date forward. So, for example, let's say you've been with your current partner for 5 years. You may want to just share the photos from the last 5 years, not photos from, say, 10 years ago when maybe you were with someone else, right? That's the idea. You can choose, okay, from this time going forward, you can share all these photos because we've been together. Like, that's one potential scenario. Or you can share just the this is what's most appealing to me. You can share just the photos of specific people with another person.
Right.
So the idea is, for example, Sylvia and I could have a shared library together, and with each other, we could say just share, on my end, I would say just share the photos of Sylvia with Sylvia, and Sylvia could say just share the photos of Federico with him. And like, we would make sure that we basically have each other's photos. Like, that I really like. I'm not sure though, and this is already like I'm filing a feature request for something that hasn't even shipped yet. This should also work for pets though. Like, I know that, but, it's not really an edge case, but I would love to say with Sylvia, share photos of her, but also photos of our two dogs. The problem is, I believe photos, while it can recognize people and you can name specific individual people, it doesn't quite recognize the same dog through the years. It just finds pets, like it just finds animals.
Right. It can identify animals. It can identify dogs versus cats, but it can't tell one from the other.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. Yeah, maybe machine learning will eventually get there. And you can also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you can also add to the shared library during specific moments. Like if you go on vacation together, I think you can share by location.
Yeah, you can. You can. It's built into the camera app too, I think, isn't it?
And it will be built into the camera app. So when you will be on vacation, there will be a button. And that's the genius part of Apple's implementation, I think.
Right.
When you will be on vacation, you can say, okay, now for the next week, I'm going to be taking pictures that I want to share with the rest of the family. Well, you will have a toggle in the camera app. So right there in the viewfinder, when you're taking a photo, it's like the live photo toggle, basically. When I'm taking this picture, make sure it automatically ends up in the shared environment.
Yeah, no, I know, because every time I go on vacation, I find myself at the end of the day with Jennifer kind of swapping photos using shared albums or, text message or whatever. And this will completely eliminate that.
Yeah, and like no more airdropping, no more having to manually create a shared album.
Yeah.
This is going to be so much nicer. And I really want to see, right now, I don't have the courage to put the public beta on Sylvia's iPhone because I believe the shared photo library finally became available in beta 3 last week. So but I don't want to do it right now.
I know. I've been thinking about how I'm going to test this because I have the same. I know I put Jennifer on a beta once and she said, nope, never again. We're done. We're not doing that anymore. I think the thing that bothered her the most wasn't the actual beta. It was the frequent updates of the beta that she didn't like to have to bother. Yeah. Right. Which, I mean, you and I, we're jumping on them the minute they drop, but average people, that's not their thing.
You and I were happy when we see
we are. It's like, oh, it's beta day. What's new? What goodies do we have to test? I should mention a couple other things, Federico. One is that I believe that the storage counts against the person who sets up and is the owner of the shared library, so that that shared library will count against whatever your iCloud storage happens to be and not against the other people. Also, you can these shared libraries will feed into both the Memories feature and into the featured photos in the Photos app and in the Photos widgets. So those things will be there as well. And also, I mean, I guess it also bears mentioning that the shared library is in fact a separate library. You can view it intermingled with your own library if you want, but you can also view those two things separately as well.
Yeah, very nice. Other things I want to mention that are new in Photos. Broadly speaking, there's a ton of new batch operations supported on iOS and iPadOS. Finally, you can select multiple files and do things on multiple files at a time. A good something that is shared across multiple apps is the ability to select multiple items and then long press to get a context menu for all those items. But specifically in Photos, something super handy that you can now do is you can select and long press to get the context menu that contains options that no longer require you to open the share sheet. Finally, for doing things like duplicating a photo, that's super handy to have now.
Nice. Yeah.
But what you can also do is you can copy and paste edits in between photos. Like if you just applied a bunch of edits to a photo, and you want to make sure that the same edits are applied to other similar pictures, you can now copy and paste edits. This is like the kind of feature that tools like Pixelmator or Darkroom offered before. Yep. Now it's built into Photos.
That's right. You can also, the other thing that's worth mentioning, I guess, is that hidden and recently deleted photos are locked by default going forward, right? So you'll get into those using your system login or Touch ID or Face ID, and you can turn off memories and featured photos entirely if you want to. All right, Federico. Well, that's a lot of ground we covered, and we've got more to go. So we're going to do
as expected.
Yes, you really can't shut us up when it comes to apps. So we're going to have another group of these to do again next week. We're going to save those. It's been a good discussion today. I want to thank our sponsors for this episode, Federico. That's Concepts, Revenue Cat, and SourceGraph. You can get extended versions of this podcast through appstories.plus. Not only are they extended, but they're ad-free, delivered a day early, and in high bitrate audio. So check that out. Today, we talked about some homework that Federico gave me last week, which involves Stage Manager and Sidecar and all sorts of experiments. I think he was trying to really screw up my setup. And so you have to listen to that pre-show segment to hear what exactly happened there. All right. Well, you can find the two of us always over on MacStories.net, of course. Federico is at Viticci on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.